Just a couple of like housekeeping things. So um, I'm going to start by talking about getting back on the water after being off the water for an extended period of time. Like for most of us who live in northern climates, it's hard to paddle in the winter. So maybe you haven't been on the water since, I don't know, November, early December. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to get back on the water and do it most effectively. Um, but then I'm going to, after we're finished with that, I'm just going to open up the floor to questions. So any question about training, racing, equipment, technique, anything you can think of paddling related is fair game, and I'm happy to answer it. I'll try to answer it in as much detail as I can without without talking all night. And um, and so if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments. Um, or the chat. I guess it's called the chat. You can put them in the chat, and then I'll go through them when I'm finished the part about getting back in the water. Well, we've got a good number of participants now, so let's get started. At 7:04. People who come on in the middle can just join us and pick up where we left off. And like I said, if you have to leave or leave and come back or whatever, it's going to be recorded so you can catch up on things at a later date. Like it's going to go up March 1st. So thank you for joining us. I just wanted to talk to everyone about getting back in the water after being off the water for most of the winter. And if that's you, I assume most of the people joining are from a colder part of the world like I am, and it makes paddling in the winter a challenge. Some people do paddle all winter. They've got the gear, they've got open water, they can do it. And other people, either because they don't have the gear or because they just don't have access to open water. Their lake freezes over, their river freezes over. They just can't get out. And they're probably dying to get out. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do over the next few weeks until your water opens up. And then what you can do once you get back on the water, what you should be thinking about. So basically, I think there are two groups of people right now that are waiting to paddle. There are the people that have been, and I'll just call it doing their homework. They've been training and doing lots of fitness work through the winter. And then there are people that, for one reason or another, and nobody's judging anybody here, they haven't been able to train as much as they would like to have trained to this point. And so let's consider first the people that haven't really been doing enough, or maybe they feel like they haven't been doing enough, or a little worried about getting back in the water because they don't think they've been doing enough. So let's talk about them first. And then once I've given them some suggestions on things that they can be doing starting now to better prepare themselves, then we can talk to everybody who hasn't been able to paddle all winter, because you'll kind of all be in the same boat at that point. Um, so if you're a person that hasn't been able to train as much as you'd like to all winter, let's talk about the things that you should be training, right? There are three pillars to performance in paddling. The first is strength. The second is your endurance, primarily your aerobic fitness. And the third is your technique. There are things that you can actually do for each of those things in the winter when you're off the water. And if you haven't been training to this point, it's not too late to start. You've got probably like 6 weeks until the beginning of April, which is a considerable period of time. If you start doing things now, you can make a pretty considerable difference in your fitness. It's going to make you much more prepared to take those first few strokes when you get on the water in April. So let's talk about what you can do. So let's talk about strength first. I honestly believe that strength is very important in our sport. The boards are, if you're a sup paddler, the boards are they're fat. They're only 14 feet long, so they're much more resistance. They have much more resistance to forward movement through the water than a sprint racing canoe or kayak, or a surf ski or an outrigger. But even if you paddle surf ski or outrigger or canoe or kayak, strength training is a big part of those sports as well. And if you want to think about how important it is, just consider what canoe kayak athletes do for their strength training. Whether they're kids who've just started at the canoe club or whether they're the national team, they spend a lot of time in the gym. And strength is a very big part of what they do. I honestly believe that if you're a stand-up paddler, it's actually even more important just because the board isn't as well designed to move through flat water. It's actually a surfboard, and even the narrowest, um, you know, like flat water boards, like a Sprint, or the equivalent, like a 21, 22-inch wide board that's very narrow. Even those ones have a lot more resistance to forward movement through the water than a canoe or kayak. They're surfboards. They've just been modified to move better through flat water than a typical surfboard. And so they take a fair amount of strength to get them up and moving, and hopefully on top of the water where they can be skipping across the surface, and where then the resistance becomes to forward movement becomes a little less. And so you do want to spend some time in the gym working on your strength. And I would suggest that in the time that you have left, that you start working with what we would call basic strength weights, which is about 15 repetitions. Um, Pick maybe 8 to 10 exercises to do in a strength session, and maybe do 3 sets of 15 repetitions. Don't bother going to failure. You don't need to at this point. Leave 1 or 2 reps in the tank at the end of each set. Um, this is especially true if you really haven't been lifting yet. Um, and if you're wondering about the exercises to do, I'm not going to go into detail. I just don't have time tonight about specific exercises to do, but think of doing your strength like this. Do a push. So that would be push ups, bench press, um, dips, tricep work, uh, exercises that work your chest and your triceps, pushing muscles, right? Do a pull. So then you're talking about doing pull ups, lat pull downs, um, body rows, bench rowing, seated rowing, one arm rowing, anything like that. So do a pull. Do a core exercise. So that's, sit ups, side bends, leg raises, all your typical ab work. So we're talking by core, we're talking about not just your abs, but your external obliques on the side of your abdominal area as well. And even some things like back extension or deadlift for your low back. So you're working that belt around the middle of your body. And then do a leg exercise. So push, pull, legs, core. And your leg exercise can be, anything like squats, um, split squat jumps, lunges, anything like that. And what I do when I'm doing my strength work is I do a push exercise, a pull exercise, a core, a legs, and then I repeat that: push, pull, core, legs. And then I usually do 10 exercises. So the last 2 exercises, maybe in the first workout, I'll do a push and a pull. And then the next time I do my strength work, I'll do a core and a legs, and I'll kind of alternate them. But if you do this, you're training your whole body. You need all those muscles for stand-up paddling. And you're doing the type of work that's going to sort of get you started into your strength routine. And I would do that for about 3 weeks. And then I'd maybe increase the weight a little bit, decrease the reps to about 10 reps. So now you're doing sub-max weights. And I would still not go to failure. I'd come close to failure, but not quite. And I would still do the push-pull legs core routine. And so that's one type of strength work I would do. The second type of strength work I would do is power endurance. Okay, so what you're going to do when you do your sets, when you do like a set of an exercise, like I say, a push exercise, you do a set, you do your 15 reps, and then you rest, and then you do your second set of 15 reps, and then you rest, and you do your third set of 15 reps, then you rest, and then you go to the next exercise. That's kind of the way that you do your strength work or your power work. When you're doing your power endurance work, I suggest you do it in a circuit format. And so there, what you're doing is you're doing your push exercise, you finish your set, and you go immediately to the pull exercise. And then you go immediately to the core exercise. And then you go immediately to the leg exercise, and then the next push, then the next pull, then the next core, then the next leg. So you go through exercise 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, all the way to 10. And then you go back to the start again. Okay. And so it's a circuit, and you never really stop. You never really take rest. You just move from station to station to station. And I would suggest that you do 20 to 30 repetitions with a weight that is light enough that you can do it at the same speed for your 20th or 30th repetition that you can for your first through to your fifth, right? Like it's not so heavy that you start off fast and you really slow down. You can kind of bang out your reps the whole time. And your first 10 reps are at the same speed as your second 10 reps is at the same speed as your third 10 reps if you're doing 30 of them. And the idea is to just simply keep your muscles moving against load and trying to do that for the whole workout. Now, I would suggest that you start with maybe 2 rounds in the first week. So you're going to go through the 10 exercises twice. The next week, you maybe try 3 rounds. If that's easy and you're confident, then maybe you can try 4 rounds. Okay. But build up to 4 rounds. You don't feel like you need to start with 4 rounds. Okay. Like the most I've ever done in a circuit like that is 5 rounds. And that took for 30 repetitions, 10 exercises, it took about 55 minutes. And if you're doing the exercises where you're banging out 30 reps and then basically moving as quickly as you can to the next station, your heart rate gets up there, and it's a very much of an endurance workout for your muscles. So you're working the ability to use power, and power is a function of the weight that you're moving and the work that you're doing and the time that you're doing it in. So speed becomes an element to power. But in this case, you're working power endurance because you're doing it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And what's that like? That's like paddling, right? So this is a vital part of your preparation for getting on the water and for your paddling success during the season. You want to try to build up your power endurance if you can during the off season. You can still try to do it during the season, but the problem is during the season, you're busy paddling. You don't tend to have as much time or energy to spend in the gym as you would when you like to be outside on the water. So again, getting back to the circuit, it's going to be power endurance, but it's also, if you're moving quickly from station to station, your heart rate's going to get up and it's going to stay pretty high. It'll spike higher in certain exercises than others. Exercises like core work or where you're lying down doing sit-ups or something like that, it'll drop a little bit. But if you're doing leg exercises like, say, split squat jumps or squat jumps, it's going to really spike. And so it will be like a cardio workout for you as well. So I've given you 2 different types of workouts to do. So what I would suggest you do is try to do one of each a week. And if you have time to do 3 sessions a week, which would be ideal in the 6 weeks or so that you have left of your winter training, then I would suggest that in week 1, you do you can do them any day that works for you, but I would suggest that you do, say, Monday, do your basic strength. Wednesday, you do your circuit. Friday, you do your basic strength. So in that week, you did the basic strength or the submax strength twice, and you did the circuit endurance, power endurance once. The second week, you do it the other way around. You do the power endurance, and then you would do the next time you did strength, you would do the submax or the basic strength, and then the third time you would do the power endurance. So you're basically just every time you go to the gym, you're doing either one or the other, but you're not doing them back to back. And that way, over the next 6 weeks, you're going to get a lot of both types of strength that you need for our sport, right? And that's not unlike the strength work that I'm giving people that I'm coaching in Paddle Monster or athletes that I coach here at home. And it's not unlike what I've been doing myself all winter. You're just getting a little bit of a later start. So, you need to be a little cautious in the first couple of weeks as you're starting up. But after a couple of weeks of that, don't overdo it with the weight that you use. But I'm pretty sure that everybody who has access to a gym can kind of get in there and do some good quality work. If you don't have access to a gym, all's not lost. What I would suggest you do is you go and you just research, just go and Google some exercises that you can do that are substitutes for gym exercises, like bench press, where you need like a bench and a bar and plates of weight to go on the bar. And you'll be able to find exercises that are bench press substitutes that you can do in your own home. And the obvious one that comes to mind is push-ups. So, you can do your push-ups, you can do your core work. There is for leg work, there's a post on the Paddle Monster website on a leg circuit that you can do. And so it's got all the leg exercises you could ever need in there. And then that is also on our YouTube channel. It's a different video, but there's also the same things on our YouTube channel. So there's resources available to you to help you with this. And pulling, you can do pull-ups. And you might want to invest, if you don't want to invest in a gym membership or you don't have a gym membership, you might want to invest in something like a TRX strap or something, where you can hang it on a door and you can do like pulling exercises on your TRX strap. Okay. And if you're unsure what that is, again, we don't have a lot of time to get into it tonight, but you can Google it and you'll see how it works and how effective it can be for helping you do some strength at home. But the point is that anything you can start to do for your strength is going to help you get ready for being in the water. And then the second pillar of performance that I mentioned is your aerobic ability, or your cardiovascular endurance. And so I would suggest for that you try to do some aerobic work 2 to 3 times a week if you can. And I would say that 30 minutes is long enough, really, especially to start with. I don't think you need to do more. We all have busy lives, and probably if you haven't been training through the winter, one of the reasons you haven't is because you have a busy life. So if that's you, then don't feel like you need to be sitting on an exercise bike, for example, for like an hour, or going outside and running, which you may not like to do, for an hour, or going to the local community center and jumping in the pool and swimming for an hour. Half an hour is plenty for you if you can do it 2 to 3 times a week. And so maybe what you'd want to do is you'd want to do this aerobic work on the days that you aren't doing your strength work. So you could do if you did strength work one day, aerobic work the next, strength aerobic, and you would have 3 and 3, and you could have a day off. And that type of thing is going to prepare you really well for the summer. Now, how intense do you need to go for this aerobic work? I would say level 2 to 3. And if you're wondering what level 2 to 3 means, basically it's like 60 to 70% of your maximum. You don't need to be pushing super hard. You just need to be moving and have your heart rate kind of in that 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate range. And that's going to put you in much further ahead than you'll otherwise be when you get on the water in the spring. Okay. Now, for technique, this is for everybody now. Okay. So look, the people who've been training all winter have been doing this type of thing. And so they've got a handle on the fitness stuff. But maybe they don't have a handle on the technique side of things. And if you haven't been training, I would expect that you're the same. You don't really have a handle on the technique side of things. So how can you work on your technique if you're not actually paddling in the water? And so I'm suggesting that you do a few things that are going to help get your mind ready for paddling. And your mind is what's going to be controlling how your body moves when you get on the water. Okay. So the first thing is just to start thinking paddling. So, if we're busy, and if we haven't been training much, then we've probably been busy thinking about other things. If we've been doing a lot of training over the winter, we've been immersing ourselves in that. We may be daydreaming about how nice it would be to get on the water, but maybe we haven't been actually thinking about what it felt like when we were on the water, what we were trying to do when we were last paddling in the fall. And you need to start thinking about that, imagining yourself on your paddle craft, whether it's a
Mm.
stand-up paddleboard, a kayak, a surf ski, an outrigger. Just kind of actually visualize yourself standing or sitting in your paddle craft with the paddle in your hand, and how you would be moving when you're paddling. And then take it another step. Try to imagine what it feels like when you're doing it. Like when you reach forward and put your paddle in the water, try to remember what it felt like. As the paddle blade goes in the water loads up on the paddle blade, and you feel that water loading up in the muscles of your arm. You feel a tug in your fingers as the paddle secures in the water and you start to work against it, you feel a little tug in your fingers, you feel it up your arm, and try to imagine feeling it up your arm. And your arms are basically just connectors to the big muscles in the middle of your body, right? Your muscles of your back, your muscles of your core, your hips, your legs. These are the muscles that we want to really engage to propel ourselves through the water. So just start thinking about paddling and imagining what it felt like when you were doing it in the fall. The second thing I suggest you do is start watching video. And if you've got video of yourself, start watching that and start thinking about what you like about what you're doing in the video you see. And also start thinking about what maybe you should or could be doing differently that would make you paddle better. Because there's nothing wrong with looking at video of you paddling, even if it was last year, looking at it and saying, well, I really like the reach that I'm getting, but maybe I'm taking a little bit too long to get my paddle buried. I'd like to get it buried a little bit more quickly with more positive blade angle. Maybe I'd like to use my hips and my legs a little bit more in the pull. And maybe I'd like to not pull it through so far behind me. I'd like to get it out of the water early. Start looking to see if there's things that you think you might want to try to do better, and start visualizing yourself doing that. Okay, that's the first thing. Next thing you can do is you can start looking at video of other people paddling in the craft that you paddle. So if you're a stand-up paddler like me, you're watching people paddling on stand-up paddleboards. There is no end to video that you can find of very good athletes paddling on paddleboards. If you're a kayak paddler or a surf ski paddler, there's lots of kayak video that you can find. Start watching some kayak video and look at what the best athletes are doing and how they move, and start thinking about how that compares to how you move. Because there are things that you can do in your paddling that can model what they do and sort of mimic what they do. And I always say that in paddling, you don't want to copy somebody's technique because each individual is different and has to find their own way to do it. But what we want to do is we want to look at the best athletes and ask ourselves, what are they doing with their paddle? What are they doing with their body to allow them to paddle really well, to really quickly? And if you start looking at their paddle and how they use the big muscles in their body and how they use their body weight, you'll start to see similarities from paddler to paddler to paddler to paddler that you're looking at video of. And you'll start to see that there are certain things that they all do, even though they may all look different, there's certain things that they all do. And those are the things that you should be trying to do in your paddle technique. Okay. So I would suggest you start doing that and start asking yourself, what can you do better? What, perhaps can you be working on? And then the last thing I would suggest that you do is try to find sources that give you some pointers or tips on technique. Now, if you are a member of Paddle Monster, we've got you covered because I've written a ton of stuff in the last year on technique. The 6 fundamentals of paddle technique, technique errors and their fixes for the catch, the pull, the exit. There's lots of stuff that is available that will help you understand the stroke better and help you through some of that process of looking at the best paddlers and trying to figure out what they're doing and then maybe how you can do something similar with your stroke. And then lastly, try to think about how you can do drills on land that kind of put your body into the positions that you're seeing these best athletes do in the videos that you're watching them paddling in. So I'm just going to tell you a quick little story. When I was 13 years old, I'd been paddling for a couple of years in canoe. The Olympic Games were in Montreal. It was 1976. This predates YouTube and cell phones and all this kind of electronic, ability to have video in your hand. And what I did was I cut out all the newspaper and magazine articles I could find of the top paddlers in the world. So with the Olympics in Canada, there was obviously a lot of coverage on every sport and all the different athletes who would be coming to compete, Canadian athletes and the best in the world. And I cut out all the pictures I could find. And what I did was I would arrange them by what part of the stroke I was looking at. And so I would have all the catch photos over here on this side of me, all the pull photos in the middle, and then all the exit photos over on one side. And I got in front of the full length mirror at my parents' house with a broom. Now the broom stick or the handle of the broom was about the same length as the shaft of my canoe paddle, and the bristles on the straw bristles on the bottom of the broom, they were like the paddle blade. And interesting, if I leaned on the bristles, they would flex a bit, which made it feel like the paddle going into the water. And I would get in my high kneel position in front of the full length mirror, and I'd look at the pictures I had arranged around me, and I would try to mimic the position I saw the world's best athletes in these photos in front of the mirror. So I get into position. I look at one of the photos. I look at myself in the mirror. I look at the photo again. I look at myself in the mirror, make sure I was in as exact a position as I possibly could be to what they were. And I would feel what that felt like. I'd lean on the broom a little bit and feel what it felt like. And what that did is it taught me the positions that I needed to find in the boat when I got on the water. And that made it really much easier to find those positions. And what I discovered is that if you could find maybe three positions, like a position at the proper position at the middle of this, at the catch, the front of the stroke, a proper position at the middle of the stroke, and a proper position at the exit or end of the stroke, and are moving your body correctly in that position, then our bodies are intelligent enough to connect all the dots between them. And suddenly you're paddling with pretty good technique, even if you haven't been on the water. And I've been using land drills in stand-up paddling, and I'm just in the process of. I did land drills for the catch in last month. March 1st, I'll have land drills for the pull, and then on April 1st, I'll have land drills for the exit. But I've been using these land drills. You can find, by the way, videos of these land drills on our YouTube page. There, I did them during the dark days of the April 2020 when everything was locked down during the pandemic and no one was paddling. I did these videos to engage people and keep them thinking about paddling. So they're out there. You don't need to join anything to find these. And you can watch them, and you can, if you're a stand-up paddler, you can be doing these drills. If you're not a stand-up paddler, you can be thinking about these drills and how you could do drills that are similar to what you need for an outrigger. Like, for example, I was in the gym the other day, and one of the trainers introduced me to somebody who's training for outrigger that I'd never met before. She started asking me some questions, and I showed her a couple of drills that are variations of what I'm doing, because she saw me doing my land drills in the gym, and I showed her drills that she could do that would the same idea for outrigger. So if you think things through, you can really kind of figure these things out. And if I could do it as a 13-year-old, certainly we can all do these as adults. But you need to look at the video and watch and think about how these best paddlers are moving, and then start to think about what positions they're in at certain parts of the stroke, the front of the stroke, the middle of the pull, and the exit, and then start to think about how you can be in that same position, mimic that position on land. It'll help you find those positions on water, and the next thing you know, you're doing the same thing in the water. It's hugely important. And what I've been doing with people over Zoom, working on technique, is largely with land drills initially. And everyone that I'm working with, and I don't see them in real life because one of them's in the UK, one of them's in Sweden, two guys are in Greece. They're all over the place, and yet they're all starting to paddle much better because they started with these land drills. So that really takes care of the technique part of it as well, right? And I know it sounds like a lot, like it sounds like, oh my God, if I haven't been training, I got to do my weights now, I got to do my aerobic work, and then I got to do all this land drill stuff. Well, look, what I'd suggest is that maybe you spend an evening a week, instead of watching Netflix or the TV news, just search some video and watch some video and start to get an idea for what people are doing. And then the land drills themselves, I tell people to do them for like 5 minutes in the morning and maybe 5 minutes at night, and that's it. Like, it almost takes as long to, like, it doesn't take any longer than it takes to brush and floss your teeth. So if you're concerned about being ready to paddle in the spring and paddling well when you get on the water, it's a relatively small investment in terms of, the technique side of things. And then if you've been training all along through the winter, you've I don't need to worry about you for strength and for your aerobic ability. If you haven't been training, you know, it's like it's not like it's needs to be a couple times a week doing strength and a couple times a week doing some 30 minutes of cardio is going to put you further ahead than you're going to be after 6 weeks over the next 6 weeks if you don't do anything, right? So that's basically all we're suggesting here. And why do you want to spend that time doing some preparation now? Well, the technique side of things is going to help you paddle better right from your first stroke. um, but the fitness side of things is going to help you um, be able to paddle with less fatigue right out of the gate. It's going to minimize your risk of injury as you start to paddle. And I think those two things are fairly important. Like obviously, minimizing the risk of injury is really important because if you get injured in the first week of getting back in the water, then it's going to delay your return to being able to paddle without injury. And then the second thing is being able to paddle with less fatigue right away. Well, that's nice too because more quickly you can get into actual real paddling rather than stopping and starting and that type of thing. So that's kind of why I think it's important to invest that kind of time in preparation before you get on the water. Now, what do you do once you get on the water? Um, well, okay, just even before you get on the water, one other thing, and Lisa reminded me of this, is um, check out your equipment. If you haven't been paddling, your equipment's been sitting there all winter and you haven't been on it and in tune with it. So check it. You'd be surprised how many times something happened to your equipment at the end of the season and you've forgotten about it. And then all of a sudden, when you want to use it again in the spring, you realize that there's a repair to be made or that something's not in proper working order. And I'm not just talking about your board. Obviously, check your board, check your paddle. I'm talking about checking your leash, making sure that it's strong, like especially where the joints are between the part that goes around your ankle or your shin and the cord, or where it attaches to your board. So check your leash. Make sure you don't need a new leash. Check your PFD. Make sure that it's the canisters, if you use the inflatable, still has the CO2 in it and it's good to go. And just check that. And then I also suggest that you check your paddling gear, like your paddling clothes, especially if you're in a climate like I am, and like I know a lot of you are, because I know a lot of you are from Ontario here. Um, you know, doesn't we can't be fooled by warm air temperatures when we go to get back on the water in the spring, because the water is going to be really cold, and so we need to be dressing accordingly, right? And so if you've got uh, you know clothes that allow you to fall in the water, they're probably a good thing to wear in the first couple of weeks, especially if you're on big water. If you're on very flat water and you're really confident, um, I don't think you need that kind of stuff. I never used to have that when I paddle canoe, and it's a very tippy boat, but I was on a very small um, stretch of water, and especially if you paddle with other people, you're probably okay without like dry suit, wetsuit type thing. But make sure that the gear that you have that you would normally paddle in is still good. Like it hasn't shrunk over the winter, or it doesn't need patching or whatever. And if it's your dry suit, check the gaskets to make sure that they don't need replacing. Um, Check if it's your wetsuit, check that there's no holes, check that the zipper still works. These are all important things so that when when you get it out of the cupboard and you go to paddle on your first day and you get down to the water and you go to put your suit on, you find out that the zipper doesn't work. It sort of, ruins the session that you're going to have. So it's better to start looking at that stuff now, and you've got, maybe up to 6 weeks to get ready. to get things ready or fixed or repaired or whatever, if something, or get new equipment if something isn't working properly. And then the last thing I would check is that if you have a hard board, if you got an inflatable, you need to inflate your inflatable. Make sure there's no leaks. Um, Make sure it's holding air. If you have a hard board, um, and you have to put it on the roof of your car to get it to the water, you need to check your racks. Okay. Check where the racks mount to the car. Um, Sometimes the pieces that hold the racks on the rails, if you've got rails in your car, or where that holds them to the gutters, sometimes those pieces, if they're a few seasons old, they can fatigue. So you want to check them, give it a good like shake. Maybe even take it to, like a rack store, like where I live, we have this place called Rack Attack where they'll come out and they'll look at it for you and tell you if you need new parts, if some of your parts are rusted or whatever. Um, because you don't want your board to fly off the car on your first trip down to the lake. Um, and then the other thing is check your straps, right? Because straps have a lifespan, and uh, you'd be surprised how many people I know in the last paddling season who lost their board, where their board flew off the roof. Like it's shocking. And like at one point, it was like one a week that I knew. And these are people too that I really thought kind of knew what they were doing, but they was just like they were unlucky. And some of them, their boards bounced and they were in a cover, and there was really minimal damage, and other people's stuff was totaled. So the thing you're always worried about isn't even the board. It's like, what if it goes through the windshield of a car behind you, right? So check that stuff. And assuming that everything is good to go, then you're good to get on the water. So let's talk about what happens when you get on the water. And the big thing I would suggest is that you start slow. Okay. And I know that if you've been off the water, and like I paddle all year round now, but for most of my paddling life, I would be frozen off the water for most of December, January, and February. And I absolutely couldn't wait to get on the water. And I was so tempted to get on the water and just go like crazy. There's two reasons that you don't want to do that. The first is that, and I alluded to it earlier, you don't want to risk injury. And if you do too much in that first couple of days, you're inviting an overuse injury. Okay. You're going to be using your muscles in ways that they haven't been used before. And you're going to be stressing not only the muscles, but the tendons that connect them to the bones. And the tendons are the really delicate, fragile part. And if they get inflamed, it's really hard to get the inflammation out of them. That's tendonitis. And once you get tendonitis, you're either looking at taking time off, probably seeing a physiotherapist, getting some treatment, and getting the inflammation totally out, and then starting anew and very carefully and slowly. Or you're looking at dealing with it for the rest of your life because it will become chronic. And it's possible to deal with it for the rest of your life. I have it in my left elbow, and I've had it there since the early 90s, and it's under control most of the time. And so you can deal with it. But when you can avoid it in the first place, it's worth doing, right? So the way to avoid it is to not go out and go crazy by doing like huge distance in your first few paddles or your first couple of weeks. And by pulling really hard and going, really trying to go really fast in your first couple of weeks. If you're doing those two things, you're putting too much load on parts of the body that aren't really ready for that yet. So if you can be sort of gentle with them while they're getting ready, they'll be ready in a couple of weeks, and then you can take the limitations off, and you can just go, and you can be pretty confident that you're not going to get any injury issues. But if you go and try to do too much too soon, if you try to pull too hard too soon, you're likely to tear or tweak or hurt something that can lead to tendonitis or some kind of muscle injury. And if you do just too much, you're just asking something to your body to do something that it isn't used to doing again and again and again and again for just too many times. and you risk getting some type of repetitive strain injury. So start slowly to protect your body. The other reason you want to start slowly is because you, in your first few weeks of paddling, are setting movement patterns that are going to be sort of ingrained in your body for the rest of the year, right? No matter what kind of technique work you were doing when you were doing your land drills or when you're thinking about paddling during the winter, um, when you get on the water in the spring, it's like a bit of a fresh start. If you haven't been on paddling for 3 months, like since last November, December, you have an opportunity to start on the water with improved technique from what you did the year before. You can actually like your habits from your old paddling, they're not as entrenched in your body as they were at the end of the last paddling season. And so you want to try to use the first few weeks, especially of your time on the water, to set good movement patterns that will then be patterns that you can carry with you for the rest of the year. You can change, it is possible to change a movement pattern in the middle of the season after you've paddled one way for 500 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers. It's possible to change, but it's much harder. It takes more work and it takes a lot more effort to make that change than if you actually start paddling well right out of the gate. Okay. So what you should be thinking when you get on the water is technique first. And your philosophy should be that you want to try to pull as many good strokes as you can and minimize the number of inferior or poor strokes that you take, right? And what we're doing is the more we do something, we create a pattern of movement, right? It imprints that movement upon your nervous system. And then that is the motion that you repeat. And eventually it's the motion that becomes second nature or autopilot for you. Okay. So you really want to make sure that you are a little bit deliberate, methodical about how you're paddling at the beginning of the year to make sure that the movement is exactly the way you want it to be. Because then you'll probably have this good technique through the rest of the season. If you get on the water and you start paddling and you feel good when you start paddling, but after a couple of minutes of paddling, you feel that things are starting to unravel a bit with your technique, but you keep going, you are now no longer paddling and imprinting good movements on your body. You're imprinting the movement that you unraveled to on your body's nervous system. And so you're making a critical error here. So what I do when I get back on the water after an extended period of time off the water, I stop paddling when I feel things start to fall apart. So I start my paddling. I'm paddling the way I want to paddle. If I feel like I'm in command of my strokes and I'm pulling the way I want to pull, moving the way I want to move, I keep going. As soon as things start to feel like it's falling apart, I stop. I stop, I stand up straight in my board, I take a deep breath, I refocus about what it was that I wanted to do, and then I start again. All right. And every time I do that, without fail, I paddle better after I've stopped. So I stop, I start again, I'm paddling better than I was when I stopped paddling because I felt things were falling apart. And I start paddling again and I do that again. I paddle until I feel that things are falling apart. And then I stop, refocus, and start again. And I'll be honest with you, I've had paddles, my first few paddles in the water, where I only go 10 to 15 strokes before I'm stopping. And then I start up again, refocus, I'm better. I might get another 15, 20 strokes, and then I'm stopping again. And it's a lot of stopping and starting, but believe me, it's worth it because it means that I'm only taking good strokes and I'm not taking bad strokes. Now, the good thing is that if that's the case, if I'm stopping every 10 to 15 to 20 strokes, I'm doing that in the first paddle. The second paddle, almost without fail, I'm maybe doing 30, 35, 40 strokes. And then the next paddle, I might be able to go for a minute without feeling like I got to stop. Right. So your body learns quickly. And before you know it, after a couple of weeks, you'll be ready to try to grind out some hard work. and do a workout where you're paddling for, say, 6 times 5 minutes, where you're going 5 minutes without stop, resting a little bit, and then going again. I'd really suggest that when you do get to that point where you feel like you can paddle for extended periods of time, um, without having to stop to refocus, that you do chunk your work into intervals like that, because the intervals, not only do they sort of keep things interesting and give you a chance to sort of, brief periods of rest that allow the paddling in the work to be better, but they give you that chance to refocus. And that really makes a difference into the quality of the paddling that you're doing when you're doing your work. Okay. Um, and it's early days when you get on the water at the beginning of April. There's usually not a race that's immediate. So you've got some time to learn to stretch things together for like a 5K or a 10K or a 15K, right? But please trust me that this is a far better approach for um, paddling well than just getting in the water and trying to grind out hard work for an hour. If you're concerned that you're losing opportunities to work on your fitness because you're not grinding out hard work in the water, then go for a run or go for a bike ride or do some type of land-based cardio work where you can work in a training zone for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or an hour, okay, and deal with your aerobic fitness. But don't try to do it on the water right away. Wait, please, until you feel like you have good control of your motion. You can paddle the way you want to paddle for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, like for extended periods of time. And then I think you're ready to try to go and do longer, steady paddles. But even then, and even now, like I've been doing it all year long. I really haven't taken any time off. But even now, like I'll go and I'll do a long steady paddle, and I'll stop after 12, 13 minutes. If I don't feel like I'm paddling really well, I'll stop, and I'll only stop for 30 seconds. So my heart rate barely comes down out of the training zone before I start again. But I'll stop for 30 seconds, kind of reorganize my thoughts and make sure, and then start again. And invariably my stroke is better when I restart. And so I still think that that's a good approach to take kind of all the time. Obviously, you can't do it in a race, but but in training, we always want to try to be paddling well because it's about creating habits. It's about creating second nature movements that are as automatic to you as things that you've been doing your entire life, like walking down the sidewalk, right? That's how much you want to make your that's how important your technique is. You want good movement patterns to be that automatic. And the way to do that is by not taking any bad strokes, right? Really minimizing the number of bad strokes that you're going to take. So those are things that I think are really important. I would try to get some video of yourself paddling as soon as you possibly can into the season, so that you can see what you're doing. See if you're paddling the way you think you're paddling. See if you're paddling the way you visualized yourself paddling in the winter when you were looking at all those videos. And then you'll have some ideas to whether there's things that you need to think about when you're paddling to change and paddle better. And then you can video kind of on an ongoing basis once every couple of weeks, just to make sure that you're doing what you want to do and not backsliding into something you don't want to do. I'd continue to visualize. And I would, if you find that the land drills are useful to you, I would continue to do them. But you don't need to do them every day, like, 5 minutes a couple times a week, especially maybe on the part of the stroke that's giving you the biggest challenge, is really useful. Okay. So that's the main thing that I wanted to share with you about getting back in the water. There is one other thing, and I would say it's pretty important, and that is to stretch. And I'm not going to go into a whole list of what stretches to do and for how long and that type of thing. Again, we all know our bodies. We all know which areas of our bodies tighten up the most. It's going to depend a little bit on what type of craft you're paddling in. Like if you're sitting in an outrigger, you're going to tighten up a little bit differently than somebody who's standing up on a paddleboard or kneeling in a C1, right? But what I'd like to impress upon you is to stretch. And your stretching should be done as soon as possible after you get off the water. Now, I know that's hard when the air temperature is cold and you drive somewhere to paddle. Um, but if possible, try to get your board on the car, changed, and drive home. And before you take your board off the car, even you know, go in the house and just do like 10 to 15 to 20 minutes of stretching, just to like loosen up the muscles that you used when you're paddling before they tighten up. Because if you don't do it soon after you paddle, trust me, they will tighten up. And because again, you're, especially in the early days here, you're asking your body to do things that it's not been used to doing for several months, and so it will tighten up. And being tight like that does a few things. One is um, the tighter you get after each workout, successively after each workout, the tighter your muscles actually get, and eventually you can lose range of motion. It increases the risk of injury. It's not going to help you paddle better if you lose range of motion. Um, but it's also just going to make your next session on the water uncomfortable, and it's going to take you longer to warm up. Might make it more difficult to move the way you want to move, right? So every time you stretch, it's not only an investment in the health of your body, but it's an investment in the quality of the next workout you're going to do as well. And again, um, like in my experience, 10 minutes is better than nothing. 15 minutes, it might be a little bit better than 10 minutes. 20 minutes, you can probably do everything you need to do, and you're good to go. It's not like you need to be spending like an hour stretching and after an hour of paddling. It's just but please, consider that. The worst thing you can do is to get off the water and sit in a chair, like either in the car or at work, or lie on the couch, or do anything like that. You bet, like if you have a job that where you walk around all day and you're unable to stretch, that's at least you're moving, and that's going to be much better. But if you have a job where you sit at a desk, or you're getting in the car and you're driving for hours and hours after you paddled, you're inviting yourself to really tighten up. And so I strongly suggest that you try to find a way. And I know it's going to, logistics can create challenges in this, but you try to find a way to stretch after you get off the water. It will make things better for you. So that's basically what I wanted to share with you about getting back on the water. I would like to open up the floor to questions. And again, these questions can be anything like related to what we've just discussed, or they can be related to training in general, to technique, to racing, to equipment, virtually anything that is related to paddling, and that maybe have been meaning to ask somebody, or that it's a question that you've come up with over the winter based on things that you've read or seen, or in videos or something like that, or that you've experienced yourself in your own training. So if you guys can I think the easiest way to do it is to just go to the chat, and so just click on that chat button, and then you can type in your question, and then I'm happy to answer it. And yeah, can everyone see that chat button at the bottom of the screen, the Zoom screen? You'll see like a toolbar along the bottom, and the chat one is kind of right in the middle. Here, actually, you know what? I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and I'll show you where it is. Okay, so you should be able to see my desktop, and here's the chat button right there. Okay, it's at the bottom of the Zoom box. You've got this toolbar, and there's where the chat button is. So please, if you have a question, that's why I'm here, to answer your questions. Oh, okay, somebody's got a question, I think. So let me just stop that share. And thanks, Larry. Are inflatable boards on for winter water? Are they okay for winter water? Yeah, I think they are. I think that they may need to be inflated. You may need to inflate them a little differently because, and I don't know about this for sure, but um, um, like my bike tires, for example, if I like when they're in the garage over the winter, they'd be like when it was warm, they were fully inflated. When it got really cold, they got somehow or other less inflated, or vice versa. Like when they're really cold, they're inflated when they're really cold, but when they go to get on in the spring, it needs inflating. Somehow or other, the temperature change has changed the air pressure inside the tire, right? And if you took chemistry like I did, but it was like almost 40 years ago. I've forgotten it all, but like temperature and pressure affect gases, and the air that's in your board is a gas, right? That's filling up your board is a gas. So you may need to inflate it a little more, but all that means is you're just going to pump a little longer, right? As long as when you pump it up, or you have your car pump it up, your automatic pump it, electric pump it up. Just you're going to check it to see that it's as rigid as it should be, and you should be fine to go paddling. I don't see that it's going to be a problem at all. And um, yeah, like I mean, I have I seen anyone out on an inflatable yet this winter?
Hey, Larry, can I jump in?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa Shell. I work with Larry on Paddle Monster, and also kind of the resident gearhead. Full disclosure, I used to work for REI, Recreational Equipment Inc., where we sold a lot of inflatables. Larry's absolutely right. You may notice some differences if you store your board inflated after you've paddled it in the winter, or if you've kept it inflated over the winter, you're probably going to notice that it needs to be pumped up again. Just be sure that you're putting in the exact amount of air pressure that your particular board requires, and you should be good to go. You should, if you have an inflatable, you should always be storing it, if possible, outside of the bag with just enough air in it to hold the shape. That does a couple of things. Most of all, it prevents creases from forming in the board itself, which can then eventually lead to cracks or weak spots that have a potential for leaks. And so storing it outside of its carry bag, flat with just enough air in it to hold its shape, is really the best way to store your inflatable to get the longest life out of it. So yeah, just be sure that when the weather starts to heat up, likewise, you don't want to leave it too inflated, because heat will make that expand, and then that will pop the baffles inside. And once the baffles inside are popped, you're not fixing that. It's ready for the landfill. So, but winter paddling with an inflatable, like Larry said, perfect, should be fine.
Cool. Yvonne just said, I live in a condo with practically no storage except for under the bed, which means I can't store the inflatable inflated. Anything I can do to help when starting the season? And Lisa, I just think in that situation, I mean, we do the best you can, right? It's ideal if you can have it partially inflated.
Absolutely.
But
yeah.
Maybe even what you do is you I don't know, maybe you rather than having a tight ball under the bed, you roll it out a little bit under the bed, so at least it's not as strongly creased, right? And because it's those creases that are almost like folds in an inflatable that are eventually going to become weak points.
Yeah.
Right.
And then and then test it before you take it out that first time. Right. Get it out in your living room and blow it up, and leave it blown up overnight, and see how much difference there is in the pressure the next day. It might be a little bit, but if you've blown it up all the way and you've left it overnight, you come out the next morning and it's flat, you probably have a problem. Right. But just go over that before you take it out for the first time.
Cool. Okay, so Brad asked he says, for anyone not looking to race anymore and who's typically trained at like 80% uh, zone 2 heart rate, 15% zone 4, 5% zone 5. So they're kind of in that 80-20, which is where you need to be in a polarized program, 80% low intensity, 20% level 4 or higher. What would you recommend for a nice healthy ratio that will save wear and tear on their body whilst maintaining strong cardio? I would actually recommend, believe it or not, 80-20. 80% level kind of level 2, level 3, like low intensity um, aerobic work. And I would recommend trying to find 15 to say 20% of the time where you're going a little faster, like level 4 or higher, which is kind of threshold training. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize about aerobic work is that you don't have to go super hard to get benefit from it. When you're going level 2, which is only like, 60 to 70% of kind of your max heart rate, it's pretty low intensity. Um, um, Things are happening, not just with your heart and your lungs, your oxygen delivery, but things are also happening at the level of the individual muscle fibers that you're in the muscles that you're using that improve your aerobic ability. So within the muscle fibers, your level 2 work stimulates an increase in the number of mitochondria, and mitochondria are the powerhouse of the muscle cell, where ATP, which is the substance that is fuel for muscle contraction, is made. It increases the enzyme activity in the muscle fiber that's used in aerobic metabolism. So if more enzymes is activity means more aerobic efficiency. And then it also increases the oxygen carrying transport ability within the muscle fiber so that you can get oxygen from the cell membrane where it's left by the bloodstream and carried to the mitochondria where it's needed to produce the ATP more readily. So these are things that occur. These are adaptations that occur working only at level 2. Now, the trick is that these adaptations occur more to a greater degree the longer you go. So 30 minutes you'll get per session, you'll get some adaptation. 45, you'll get more. An hour, you'll get more. An hour and a half, you'll get more. Right. So, ultimately, when you get on the water, if you're just paddling kind of like level 2 for an hour or 80 minutes or something, you'll be getting lots of these adaptations occurring in your paddling muscles that are going to lead to better aerobic performance or better ability to paddle aerobically without like using oxygen to produce the muscle contractions. But I do think that it's really good to go harder as well because it's hard to improve your VO2 max if you're only ever going low intensity. Your VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can utilize, and in order to train the body's ability to use great amounts of oxygen, you need to work at a high level. And I would also say that if you've probably all heard of high intensity interval training. Well, the 15% training in zone 4 or 5% training in zone 5, that's all your high intensity interval training. And so like it has great impact for your health, but it's working at your aerobic fitness from the other end of the spectrum, from like a higher intensity spectrum. You don't need to train for nearly as long. Like you can go out and you can do 10 really hard 1-minute pieces and you've done something really productive for your fitness. And it's fun. It's fun to paddle faster. Like, so it's just not fun to paddle fast all the time. What I would suggest in order to sort of minimize the pain on your body and especially on like your joints and things like that is that you spread the work out so that you do your up to 20% of your higher intensity work. You do it well spaced out from each session is well spaced out from each other. So for me, when I'm setting a program, I will only consider doing high intensity work for the athletes on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And then Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays are much lower intensity. So they have some recovery time in between. So they're not pulling hard every day. Because if you're pulling hard every day, you're gonna get sore joints. In paddling, you're gonna get sore elbows, sore shoulders. If you're stand-up paddling and your knees are, flexing a lot because you're bending and straightening your legs, you'll get sore knees. You can get sore hips. And then the other thing is that if you're pulling hard on consecutive days regularly, you're not giving your nervous system time to recover. Your nervous system controls your body's muscles, right? It tells what muscles to contract and when they should contract and what sequence when you're paddling, working on your technique. When you're paddling hard, your nervous system recruits more of the fibers in the muscles being used to the task of paddling. It's the same thing that happens in a gym if you're lifting. If you're lifting a light weight, you can lift a weight. You say you're doing biceps curls, you're only going to use a small number of the available muscle fibers in your biceps. But if you go to use a really heavy weight and do biceps curls, your nervous system is going to recruit a much greater number, maybe like 90-95% of the available muscle fibers in your biceps to do the lift. And the same thing happens when you paddle hard. In all of your paddling muscles, more muscle fibers are recruited when you're pulling harder. And that means that your nervous system's doing more work, and your nervous system can get fatigued. So, and when it gets fatigued, it takes a long period of time to recover, which means you could be looking at, weeks or even a month where you don't feel like yourself when you're paddling. And that's not something that you want to get to. It's really easily avoidable by making sure that you don't pull stupidly hard every day. And if you spread out the hard sessions so that you've always got like an easier level 2 session in between. Okay. The other thing I would say too is that even in terms of it's not so much like we're going to look at 80-20 as the sort of the ideal for a polarized program. They say polarized because you're working at either end of the spectrum, either pole of the spectrum between super high intensity work and really much lower intensity work. And you're not really doing a lot of work in the middle. They say that it should be about 80% low intensity work and 20% higher intensity work. But that 80-20 isn't like the number of workouts you do, it's time spent in zone, right? And it's really easy to have lots of time spent in your training zone at level 2 or low level 3 when you're doing long, steady paddles that might last an hour or 80 minutes or something. And where your high intensity work might consist of 10 minutes of work if you did 10 1-minute pieces all out. So most people don't have to worry about being, more than 20% high intensity work. Most people are actually under it. And that's fine, especially if you're not racing. But I do think you want to do that type of work because it's fun and it has benefits. Danielle, Larry, I'm up to 60 minutes plus on the Roar once a week with level 2-3 cardio. Once a week with level 2, up to 60 minutes plus on the Roar once a week with level 2-3 cardio 4 to 5 times a week. That's a lot of cardio. That's great. I've only been doing 2 strength workouts with my home gym. Should I be doing more than 2 strength and cut back on the cardio? It's a good question. First of all, well done on doing cardio almost every day. That's fantastic. We're a really aerobic sport, and you are going to be really well prepared aerobically. So that's fantastic. The strength bit, I would maybe consider doing 3 strength sessions a week and dropping a cardio, not because it's necessarily the right thing to do, because I think whether you spend more time working on your strength or more time working on your cardio often depends on the individual and what their relative strengths and weaknesses are, right? So for somebody who's got a real strong, a real highly developed aerobic system, aerobic ability, they could probably afford to do a little less aerobic work and do more strength. And if somebody was very strong, but sucked at cardio, they'd probably be better to do a little less strength and a little more cardio. However, what I would say to you in your instance is, since you've been doing this for a while, I would maybe consider doing a little bit more strength and a little less cardio, just to give your body a bit of a different stimulus and to mix things up a bit, because our bodies will get used to the stimulus that we're providing it. And after a period of time, whether it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, the adaptations that result from that stimulus tend to be a little bit less. Like we adapt really quickly at first, but then the adaptations start to level off. And so there's diminishing returns to doing the same thing again and again and again. But if you did a little bit more strength at the expense, I know you've got a limited amount of time to train. So if you took maybe one of the cardio sessions and did a little bit more strength, maybe that would give your body a slightly different stimulus that would result in a little bit more of the adaptations that you're looking for with the training time that you're spending. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. You hit the nail on the head. The only caveat to that, Larry, is you mentioned the 80-20 kind of rule with heart rate zone.
Yep.
So I would say that my problem is that I'm not getting the 20%, or like that 20% in the high heart rate.
Right. So, okay, so let's talk about that too. I really believe that like when people talk about the 80-20 rule, it's not really a rule. So the interesting thing is with training is, like, you know, like a lot of stuff that like, it's like, you know, when we read about health in a magazine, like I just saw something on YouTube that said coffee is great for your kidneys. And then I read something in Toronto Star the other day that said, oh, coffee might be really bad for your kidneys because of the caffeine. So there's conflicting information. And there's a little bit when it comes to the 80-20 rule as well. And that's that it really depends on the phase of training that you're in. So you've trained with me before, and you know that we go through periods of training where the focus is accumulation, where the main focus is development of aerobic base. And then we'll do that for a period, like a phase of training that might last for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. And then we go and we change the focus to an intensification phase where we focus more on intensity. And then that's where the 80-20 really comes into play, because even in an intensity phase, you can't do intensity every day. You're probably doing your 80-20 3 times a week, right? But it, generally speaking, right now in the dark days of winter, for a sport like paddle sports, where we're preparing for races that are going to be in the summer, you know, probably the important races, we're looking at May at the earliest, more likely June, July, August, right? So they're still a long way down the road. We're still really in a accumulation phase. And so you doing the level 2-3 work that you're doing right now, I would look at that as a good thing, that you're building a really good level of aerobic base. But when you get on the water, you'll be doing some aerobic base work as well. But then, you know, you're going to transition into higher intensity work. And then that's where you really hit the 80-20. I would say that if you move your strength from 2 to 3 strength, and you do one of them, at least one of the workouts as a circuit, like as I've described earlier, where you're running from station to station, your heart rate is going to spike, especially if you do, you know, like big full body exercises, like leg exercises, like split squat jumps or squat jumps, or one of the pressing exercises I do is clean and press, where I pick a barbell up off the floor, you know, use my legs and my back to bring it up to my shoulders, then press it overhead, then repeat that motion. And it's a full body exercise, and my heart rate spikes. It goes through the roof.
Yeah.
And it never really comes down in the easier exercises, because the easier exercises, when you're doing 30 reps and you're running from station to station, you know, aren't really that easy. And so you'll find that you'll be doing if you do a circuit really aggressively like that, you'll find that there are good chunks of work in that heart rate or in that workout where your heart rate's going to be level 4. So that might even address the intensity for you right there.
Yeah,
right?
that's perfect.
So, yeah. Okay. Cheers. Okay.